My wife said to me this morning, where are we sitting? I said, I'm sitting on the front seat. She said, you are? I said, yes, it says the Pharisees love the front seats in the synagogue. Let's read from the Gospel recorded by Luke. Chapter 7. I got the wrong chapter here. Okay, chapter 7, sorry. Verse 36. And one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. And behold, a woman of the city, she was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment. She stood behind his feet, weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with ointment. Now when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spake within himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and the woman this is, that toucheth him, for she is a sinner. Jesus answering said unto him, Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And he said, Master, say on. There was a certain creditor which had 2 debtors. One owed him 500 pence, and the other owed him 50. Tell me therefore which of them would love him most. Simon answered and said, I suppose that he to whom he forgave most. And he said unto him, Thou hast rightly judged. And he turned to the woman and said, Simon, seest thou this woman? Thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she hath washed my feet with tears, and wiped them with the hair of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman, since the time I came in, hath not ceased to kiss me. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins which are many are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. And he said unto her, Thy sins are forgiven. And they that sat at meat with him began to say within themselves, Who is this that forgiveth sins also? And he said to the woman, Thy faith hath saved thee, go in peace. This story is recorded by each of the evangelists. There are not 4 Gospels, there's one Gospel told by 4 different men. And there are 4 different accents on this story. I think this is the most beautiful of them. But this is one link in a chain of events which had rocked and shocked Jerusalem for quite a period. I understand that tornadoes are caused by hot air meeting with cold air. And there had been great disturbances in Jerusalem. There had been a wave of hot air from the Pharisees and the temple guard and others. And there had been a wave of cold air from them, a wave of warm air, because there was jubilation. But at last somebody had come who really cared for the sinners. You could say on one hand there were waves of jealousy, and on the other hand there were waves of joy. And this event here records the great social event of the year. I guess everybody in Jerusalem knew by the time this feast was to be held, at least this woman had heard of it, and she sure was not on the guest list. It's a wonderful thing that the only person we know who went to the feast isn't on the guest list. She gate-crashed it. I think this man Simon had a lot of problems. First of all, he had very limited space to put his guests, and I figure that he made out a list of guests and deleted one name and put another one in, and eventually he got the list just where he wanted it. And after he'd settled on the folk who were coming, then he had to settle on the food. After all, if you were having Mr. Carter to dinner today, you wouldn't give him hamburger on potato chips. Well, maybe you would by rating right now, but normally you'd have a great big festivity, you'd make a great big banquet. And this, I'm sure, is exactly what this man did. He got the right folk there, he got the right food, he got the right flowers, he wanted a good aesthetic atmosphere, and as the nursery rhyme says, everything in the garden was lovely. He got up that morning, if I read his mind aright, saying something like this: "This is going to be the greatest day in my life, a day I shall never, never want to forget." Whereas it became a day that he never, never wanted to remember. One of those lovely days that you've had sometimes. You know, the first thing you do, you put your foot on the floor and there's a pin there. and from that indication, you're going to have trouble the whole day through, because the whole day ended in chaos. People are going to leave this banquet saying, "You know what, I've never been to a banquet. The tables were loaded." Oh, no doubt there was wine, because they drank it in those days very much. And I believe he thought people would go from that banquet talking about his generosity, whereas they left it talking about his stupidity. After all, everything was in order, and he puts a guard there and says, "Look through the lattice, and as soon as you see some distinguished person, let me know." And they came, and according to custom, they took the guests and kissed them on either cheek and showed them to a slave or a servant, and the servant washed the feet of that individual, and they took them to the table, and they found just where they were to sit, and everything was going well, when suddenly one of the servants said, "Master, come here quickly." And he had just been excited because the mayor or the master or millionaires had just come into the banquet, and his ego was inflated. And he felt great. He thought, "Boy, I'm establishing myself with society. This is an epoch in the history of Jerusalem." After all, he got a man there. The reason for the uprising in Jerusalem, the disturbance, was what always happens when Jesus goes. We say Jesus is the Prince of Peace. Jesus is the Prince of War. Wherever Jesus goes, there's trouble. He goes into a family, he breaks it up. I remember some society people used to come to a church I pastored in England. They used to dance in Buckingham Palace. They used to dance in the arms of dukes. They used to go to the great social gatherings in the Queen's circle and royal circles and dukes and what have you got. Like Brother Red there used to meet with that bunch too. But anyhow, at least some of his friends. And you know, when these girls were not saved, everything was all right. But once they got saved, they became a thorn in the side of their relatives. She won't drink anymore. She won't dance anymore. She doesn't want to smoke anymore. She won't play cards anymore. What's wrong with her? She thinks she's better than we are. And immediately, wherever Jesus goes, you get trouble. He came not to bring peace, but a sword. He brings peace to us individually. You see, Jesus was having trouble here because of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They were very much the same, a little bit different theologically. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection, the Sadducees did not. That's why they were Sadducees. But he had trouble with them. They were antagonistic to his theology. And now they hear that this man, Jesus, the first thing, they were troubled with the man. The second thing, they were troubled with his message. The third thing, they were troubled with his miracles. He'd arrived on the scene. He didn't even have the headquarters on earth. Well, he did under a tree. When he wasn't using it, the foxes slept there. He didn't even have any stationery. He didn't even have a broadcast. Didn't even have an entertainment center for Christians. You wonder how ever he made it. But anyhow, he arrived on the scene with no social backing, no prestige. He began his life with a bunch of prostitutes. How do you know? Because he was baptized between thieves and prostitutes. He ended up on the cross with them. In the middle of life, he's with them. This woman did what she would never do to a Pharisee. She drew near to Jesus because she'd heard somebody say, "This man receiveth sinners." I think that's one of the greatest titles ever given to Jesus, so we never call it his title. If ever you go to Ireland, it's a great country. It's a bit noisy at the moment, but if you ever go to an island, they sing a wonderful hymn there. Sing it o'er and o'er again, "Christ receiveth sinful men." You know, come to think of it, he doesn't receive any other kind anyhow. The only thing that will get you to Jesus is you're a sinner, a stinking, rotten, proud Pharisee, church member, deacon, pastor, or anything else. But the only way to Jesus is that we're sinners. Now this woman daringly comes. The guest had been arriving, and the servant says, Master, you know that certain woman? He says, yes, if she comes, turn the dogs on her. But Master, she's here. Where? I think Jesus came in at the back door. I think he came in the servants' quarters. I like the hymn, it's on the sheet we didn't sing this morning, or did we? Jesus. To that tune in England, we used to sing a hymn, my heart and voice I raise to spread Messiah's praise. The second stanza is, a servant's form he wore, and in his body bore our dreadful curse on Calvary. He like a victim stood and poured his sacred blood to set us guilty captives free. Jesus had no show, no ostentation. You didn't get an introduction like some of the big boys get on TV and radio. You know, you got to introduce somebody. He's got nothing, so blow him up. Jesus had no trumpeters going in front of him. As soon as he came, there was trouble. He was only that size. Isn't it amazing that before he could walk or talk, Jesus broke a city in two? He was born, they said, have you heard the news? A king has been born. And Herod was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him, because there was a little baby about that size. He separated men when he was born. He separated men on the cross. One went to hell, the other went to heaven. He separated men while he lived. This man receiveth sinners, others went away from him. And Simon looked and he saw that woman there. Oh, he said, in our language, I blew it. He's no prophet. If he were a prophet, he'd know that she's a harlot, she's this, she's that, she's the other. And Jesus read his mind. Matter of fact, he can read yours right now if it gives you any comfort. Simon said, I made a mess of it. He's no prophet. And Jesus gives him a little story. He said, Simon, there were two men. One owed 500 pence, the other owed 50 to the same man, which would love him most if he had his debts forgiven. Oh, well, of course, the man who has the biggest debt. You know, that's why it's so difficult to get some stuffy church people really say. They never realize how rotten they are. If I learned anything, the couple of years I worked with Dave Wilkerson in his early days when he was struggling there in New York, we lived in that hellhole, that ghetto. If I learned anything, it was this, that when those kids came out of a horrible pit, you didn't have to persuade them they were sinners. What they wanted to know is anybody big enough to get me out of it? Is there an arm long enough and strong enough to lift me? He only had one quarrel with the Apostle Paul. That was that he said he was the chief of sinners, and they said, no, I'm the chief of sinners. This woman knew she was a sinner. I can imagine her at the door. If you'd seen her, you'd have seen her dress going like that. Her heart was beating that loudly. And she said, shall I really do it? You know, I don't really think that this is an unpremeditated act, but it's an unprecedented act. She didn't copy anybody else. We always copy what other folk are doing. Let somebody stage a big show on TV and the guy changes and switches his format. It must be glittering and glamorous. He may not say anything, but after all, you're not supposed it's not what's on the plate. If you eat off a Limoges plate, it's the fact that the plate was worth $50, even if you had potato chips. And today we serve things up glittering. There's not much in them. There's not much substance in them. This woman runs to the Lord Jesus Christ. Simon says he's no prophet. And Jesus rebukes him on 3 counts. What does he say to him? In verse 45, pardon me. In verse 44. I entered into thine house, thou gavest me no water. Verse 44. Verse 45. Thou gavest me no kiss. Verse 46. You gave me no oil, you didn't anoint my head. He was so busy greeting everybody else that when the chief guest, that he didn't understand anyhow. He wanted him for social standing. He wanted him because this Christ was a sensation. All Jerusalem was, again I say, was in a state of earthquake. There were volumes of hatred. There were volumes of praise. There were great hurricanes of jealousy. There were great hurricanes of joy. People were stopping at street corners and say, "You aren't so-and-so." "Yes, but I've seen you begging at the wrong side." "Well, I don't beg anymore, you see. He touched me." Boy, they'd have sung that a lot better than we sung it. "He touched me. Oh, he touched me." This woman comes and Jesus says, "Simon, I entered your house. Thou gavest me no water. Thou gavest me no oil. Thou gavest me no kiss. Thou gavest me no water." This woman says, "If I ever get in there, I'm going to wash those feet with water, not on your life." "You mean to say I'm going to get the holiest feet that ever walked the earth in my hands and wash them with water?" "No," she says, "I'll not wash them with water. I wash them with my tears." She should have stood in front of him. She stood behind him. Now, she must have nearly broken her neck doing it. But you see, love doesn't care what it costs. I don't know. I can only guess that maybe Charles Wesley got inspiration for one of his hymns out of this. When he said, "Oh, let me kiss thy bleeding feet and bathe and wash them with my tears. The story of thy love repeat in every drooping sinner's ears, that all mankind with me may prove thy sovereign everlasting love." Wash his feet with water? No. She washed his feet with her tears. She should have got a nice, soft, brand new towel, and she said, no, I'll never wash those feet with water. And I won't dry his feet with a towel. And she had lovely long hair, and she pulled the pins out, and that hair cascaded down. When I think of this, I think of my sister. She had long hair. She could sit on it. Mother used to brush it. She used to buy a special whalebone brush. I know when she finished brushing it, it was as shiny as though she'd put some of that shoe shine yours with, that, whatever it is. But Mother used to brush it, and that hair used to shine. My mother used to say, "Let you come and feel it." They said, "Isn't it lovely?" And I said, "It is." When Mother was there, I felt it. When she wasn't, I pulled it. But anyhow, the fact was that I never read this story without thinking of this stupendous fact. Wash his feet with tears? No, wash them with water. Dry his feet with a towel? She took the hair of her head and took his feet in it. Oh, it must have felt gorgeous, that lovely hair. You see, in typology, she laid her glory at his feet. A woman's glory is her hair. Most of you are so worldly about it cut off, but it doesn't alter the fact. If you join the old Pentecostal church, that real fiery Pentecostal church in Sweden, the Church of Philadelphia, if you went through the door with your hair cut, the deacon would write your name down. You'd have to meet the church board during the week. And they'd say, "Sister, we don't understand why you're backslidden so much. Why do you want to copy the world?" Now, that's a fact. I don't know whether they still do it. They did it until a few years ago. We're not worldly, are we? No, we don't drink, smoke. But you see, this is where it's difficult, really. God's always hitting the pride, and particularly of women. Tells you not to wear ornaments. You're certainly not to wear earrings. And when you mention this, people say, "Oh, now listen, you've got to watch this. This is legalism." Anything we don't like is either legalism or bondage. Have you noticed that? Anything that irritates me gets against me. Well, I think for some, particularly ladies, because women don't wear earrings, some clowns do, but not many. But I think this is where you take up your cross. It isn't being nailed just to a cross. It's every day somebody pointing the finger, maybe in the office, and say, "She doesn't paint," you see. Say, "No, Indians do. The Indians, they do." And some of these clowns in jazz bands, they paint up. But as Christians, the adornment is not external. If it isn't internal, what in the good is it getting painted like a battleship? If you haven't got beauty inside, I wouldn't look twice at you with all your makeup. And I don't care if Avon does go bankrupt, but there you are. The fact is that this woman took what was her glory and she wiped his feet with the hair of her head. Can you imagine that bunch of folks sitting there and looking and thinking to themselves, "What's this guy doing here, letting this woman make all the palaver? She's weeping, she's sobbing, and spilling her hot tears on his feet and taking her hair down and wiping his feet." And then she produced an alabaster box of ointment. In John's account, he says it was very costly. There are some details there that are very beautiful. It said that she took just 1 pound of ointment and it cost 300 pence. Does it matter? It may not to you, but it does to me. It matters enormously. Why? Because, you see, she was saving this up for a funeral. Now, if this Mary is the sister of Lazarus, Lazarus had been dead, but she didn't love her brother enough to spill a pound of spikenard on his feet, which I guess is the way sisters do anyhow. I'm going to have a real first-class funeral. Are you going to have one? I mean, it doesn't make much sense. You can't see what's going on. So why don't they bury you in the jam jar or something? I mean, Billy Graham used to tell the story of a man who was being buried. He was a Texan, and so they buried him in a solid gold coffin, and as they lowered him down, one of the colored brothers said, as they lowered the casket, one said to the other, "Boy, what a casket." And the other said, "Boy, that's the way to live." But don't we love the outward decoration, the outward show? This woman isn't doing this to be a showpiece. Nobody had ever done it before her. She hasn't got a blueprint of somebody else's sacrifice and devotion. She'd been saying to herself over and over, "I would never go into the temple, but I do know this, because I can remember hearing over and over and over and over again my people always saying, well, the Lord, He is God, and they're always quoting Isaiah 35, that one day somebody's going to touch this earth who is God Himself, and when He comes, He'll have all the power of omnipotence. In other words, given back to Him, the last Adam will be all the power that the first Adam should have had, and he had it and lost it. And we'll know when the church has really got a super Pentecost, because all the power that came to the first Adam will come to the last Adam. What did He do? Well, when the years come, Isaiah 35 says, the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped, the lame shall leap as a hart, the tongue of the dumb shall sing. And He did everything the Word of God would say. And so all Jerusalem is alive. Why, we've been going to the synagogue and the temple, and those old boys go through and they growl, and say, let's all quote a psalm you could quote backwards way, but there's no life, there's no power, there's no authority. And Jesus comes, and instead of giving a bit of dignity to the temple, He does all His ministry in the street. Never took an offering. Isn't that a shame? I think that inwardly this woman said to herself, I believe this now is really the Son of God. And out of her overflowing heart she washed His feet with tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. And then she broke that costly 1 pound of alabaster of ointment, spikenard, nard they call it for short, but spikenard. Remember, it came in the life of Jesus 3 times. It came when He was a babe. They presented gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. It came on the cross, and it comes here, shall we say in the middle of His ministry at least, if not the middle of His life, the middle of His ministry. She breaks the box of ointment. Do you know what this woman was doing? Do you know why she went? Well, I haven't read this anywhere. My own conclusion is this. She went there to do just one thing, and that was to worship Jesus. How do I know? For 2 reasons. Or 3 reasons. One is she took a gift. The second reason, it was a very costly gift. And the third reason, she never said a word to Him. Everybody and his brother these days wants a ministry. Are you suggesting this woman didn't have a ministry? I met prostitutes on the streets of New York, young men and young women, jailbirds, bedeviled with every kind of sin you could mention. And if you'll permit me to say this and not be offensive, well, when I said to one young man, I said, will you take a cup of coffee? It was down in the hole that we had there in Greenwich Village, and he said yes. And I reached a cup of coffee and a donut, excuse me, and before I sat down he said this. There was a certain man named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. The same came to Jesus by night and said, Good Master, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said unto him, I said, Hold it, you're ahead of me. He said, Isn't that what you're going to tell me? I've heard Nicodemus from the top to the bottom, from east to west and north to south. I've heard Nicodemus everywhere. Oh, I said, you have a background, and at least a religious background. And he almost spit in my face. He said, my dad's a missionary in Africa chasing niggers so they won't go to hell. and his own children are perishing. Now that would send you back home not to sleep, wouldn't it? You meet a gorgeous girl who says, well, I've been prostituting for 2 years. You see, my mother is always so busy in the church, and she's here, there, and everywhere. I've got no time for your ministry if all your ministry is to other kids and you're only going to the devil. Timothy says, let them first show piety at home. As I meditated this morning, I wonder what would have happened if Mrs. Wesley had wanted a ministry like her husband. A woman came to Wesley one day and said, you believe in women ministers? He said, no. She said, well, God has called me to the ministry. He said, are you married? Yes. Have you a family? Yes. Children? How many? 17. Oh, he said, he's not only called you, he's given you the congregation. Mrs. Wesley had 19. What if she'd been running off to meetings and wanting a ministry here and a ministry there? We'd have missed two of the greatest brothers that the world ever saw. You'll see a mark for them on the walls of Westminster Abbey. John, who was the architect under God of Methodism. Charles, whose hymns will be sung all over the world this morning. Love divine, all love excelling. Jesus, lover of my soul. If she hadn't nurtured them and nursed them and she educated them. She didn't give them fairy stories to read merely. She took the Word of God. She took each child, each child for an hour, each night. Now all the 19 weren't living at the same time. She lost the number, sure. But each night she'd say, and Charles would say, it's my night tonight, Mother. Yes. And for 1 hour, she took that child and instructed it in the things of God. I'm glad she did. You know what we've done? We've taught Christian people to work, and we've taught them to witness. We have not taught them to worship. Our only idea of ministry is wearing yourself thin. I believe you could win, listen, and I mean this, as God records it in heaven, and that's an awesome thing about preaching, that as I preach this message, God is going to put it down on something more accurate than any tape recorder. I believe you could win 100 people to Jesus Christ every day and still be a disappointment to Him. Why? Because you haven't worshipped Him. Somewhere about in the 17th or a bit further on maybe in Exodus, where God says, you separate Aaron and his sons to minister to me, not to minister to the people. In the Old Testament economy, a man could be a soldier when he was 20. Because then and now you don't need brains to kill anybody. So he could be a soldier at 20. He could not be a priest until he was 25. He could not be a high priest until he was 30. Jesus, don't ask me why, ask Winky, he's a better theologian. But tell me this, a priest could not be a high priest until he was 30. Jesus did not minister till he was 30. John Baptist did not minister till he was 30. Moses did not minister till he was 30. The Apostle Paul was past 30. I don't know why that cutoff is there at the age of 30, but it's there nevertheless. So in the old economy, a man could be a priest when he was 25. He could not be a high priest, which meant he could not go into the Holy of Holies. The priest ministered to people in the outer court. He ministered to people. God says, separate Aaron and his sons to minister, not to the people, to minister to me. In the outer court, there was daylight. In the inner court, there was a candlelight, 7-branch candlestick. In the Holy of Holies, there was no light at all. Now, how long do you think we'd have to wait? Let's come down here. Let's forget about the backslidden Methodists and the half-on-fire Pentecostals and the others. But anyhow, supposing we came every Lord's Day morning here into this sanctuary. It's not very charming. I don't see any stained glass windows. I hope there won't be any in the new place. But supposing we waited till the glory of God filled the temple. Can you imagine the priest coming out of the daylight into the candlelight, into a black chamber where there was no light at all unless the glory of God came? Now the glory of God doesn't come to us, so we clap and sing and shout. I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm saying it's a substitute for the deeper thing, for the more powerful thing. It could lead on to that. You see, prayer is preoccupation with my needs. Praise is preoccupation with my blessing. Worship is preoccupation with God. I don't know how many people call me and ask me, where can I get Dr. Tozer's books? Or they say, I'm reading this book of Tozer's and that. Now, if you want to go to a real good school, apart from Agape, you read Tozer's book. First of all, read his Pursuit of God. And then after that, read his 21 studies on the Holy Spirit, the knowledge of the Holy. And that'll do as much good as a year at Bible school, if you digest them, that is. And I like the things he wrote. I like better the things he told me personally in his office. And one of the most staggering things was this. I went in one day and he said, Len, lock the door. He showed me a piece of rug. It was about, I guess not more than 40 inches by about 28. And he said, Len, look at that rug. I looked at it. And I said, I've seen your rug. These are his exact words. He said, Len, I come in my office some mornings. I call my secretary and say to her, put a notice on the door, no interviews today. You go home, I can't dictate any letters today. And then he said what I think is one of the most awesome things I've ever heard. And I've heard the greatest preachers in the world in the last 60 years. He said, I get on that rug on my belly at 8 o'clock in the morning and I worship the Lord Jesus, the ascended Christ, at 8 in the morning, and I'm still there at 11 or even 12 or even 1 o'clock. Now that's awesome. But a man with a vast intellect, he'd acres of culture, a brilliant mind, a rich relationship with God, and he says, I can lay on that rug for 4 or 5 hours and worship Him and never say a word of prayer and never say a word of praise, just worshiping Him. Gazing on His holiness, gazing on His majesty. We don't often concentrate. Lord, we thank you what we've done for us, and you've blessed us this week, and you've done this for us this week. Forget it. Turn it the other way. How often do you get there and say, Lord Jesus, I'm thinking of you now. You were there before the stars were there, before the trees of the field clapped their hands, or the stars sang together. From everlasting to everlasting thou art God. Get some of those old majestic hymns, say, of Wesley's, He laid His glory by and wrapped Him in our clay. Could you lay down on the floor for even an hour without saying a word? Most of us would have gone to sleep. Without putting in a word of request? Tozer liked to get hymns. As a matter of fact, you sell the hymn book that he wrote here, and everybody should have a copy of it. It's in a paperback, a good edition now. What's it called? Christian hymn? Yeah, Christian, thank you. Christian Book of Mystical Verse. He puts Ter Stegen in there, Madame Guyon, one that he liked most, best of all, Faber. He said, Len, I'll tell you what he said to me too. He said, Len, let everybody else do what they like. You and I will worship God face downwards. I read this morning about Abraham. God appeared to him and he fell on his face. And then I turned into the Matthew, I forget the chapter 20, somewhere around there, where it said that Mary and the Marys went to the grave, and they turned, and as they came back, Jesus met them in the way. What did they do? They shook hands with Him. No, they didn't. It says they fell on their faces and they seized Him by the feet. The most favored men that ever lived were surely the 12 disciples, and I think the most favored of all was John. Not John Baptist, John the disciple. He laid his head on the bosom of Jesus. He heard that divine heartbeat. He felt the throbbings of eternity. And he knew and understood Jesus better than anyone else. Read the Gospel of John, which, as Dr. Kaufman says, John was the Plato of the New Testament. It's the most profound thing maybe ever written, most beautiful thing ever written. And you remember that John was on the Isle of Patmos. And he had a revelation. Of who? Of Jesus. What did he do? Do you think he went up and said, well, Jesus, nice to see you again. You know, I was the most faithful of all the 12, and I'm sure you know that I've just about finished the best recording of the gospel. John, who listened to the divine heartbeat. John, who used to sleep with him and eat with him and walk with him and talk with him when he saw him in his risen glory. He says, I fell at his feet as dead. Some people have the idea when we get to heaven, through silly songs we've written, we're going to rush up to Jesus, shake hands, and say, hey buddy, boy, it's great to see you. I've been wanting to do this, I remember when we were out with Candle, or out with Agape, or out with somebody, or the Salvation Army. No, we're not going to do that. I think this woman was awestruck with the majesty of Jesus. She suddenly realized who he was and what he was. And when I see him, he's not going to be the pathetic Christ of stained glass windows and what artists think. When I see him, I'm going to be terrified with his majesty, because his hair is as white as snow, and his feet are like burnished brass, and his face is like the sun in his strength. Mary Antoinette was maybe the most beautiful woman that ever lived. She was a power behind the ruler of France, who I forget who he was, Louis XIV or 15 or somebody, but anyhow, she was a big shot. She manipulated him. She was 21, and she was the epitome of beauty and majesty. But one day she crossed up with the king, and he threw her in the Bastille, which is destroyed now. She went into the Bastille knowing that in the morning, when the clock struck 7 or 8, she was to die. When she went in, she was gorgeous. Had a gorgeous hair. She had a face that didn't need any makeup. It looked like just beautiful enamel. Flawless skin, beautiful teeth. They put her in the Bastille. She never went to sleep. She heard the tolling of the bell of Notre Dame. When they went in the morning, that 21-year-old woman was 101. The face that didn't have a mark had 1,000. It was treated, it had shrunken, the color had gone, her hair turned as white as snow in the night. Why? Because she was dreading the agony of laying that lovely head on the guillotine that would come down and chop it off. I like the hymn that says, lo, the tokens of his passion, though in glory still he bears. White hair is a sign of purity, it's a sign of antiquity, it's a sign of suffering. And John says, I saw him, his hair was as white as snow, his feet were like burnished brass, his face like the sun in its strength, his eyes were living coals of fire, his voice as sound and majestic as roaring waters. What did we sing this morning? Oh, I was going to have you sing it, you stole my thunder there. Oh, that was yonder sacred throng. Listen, are we going to wait till we get there to fall at his feet? If we're going to worship him to all eternity, don't you think it's time we did a bit of homework? She somehow senses this woman. She says, I don't care what they say. It's a stag party. They could take me and throw me out of the door, but I'm going to risk it anyhow. It's a chance of a lifetime. Exactly what you have. You've only one life to live. You say, I have no box of spikenard to take. Are you sure? Maybe your box of spikenard is your pride. Maybe it's a career. Maybe you're itching for a pub. This woman did more in her silence. She never opened her lips. She took the most costly thing that she had, and that's what worship demands. It demands saying, no friend, I'm sorry I can't come to dinner. I haven't spent enough time with the Lord today. No friend, I can't do this. Because you see, so many of us are caught up in activity. Activity, it's service and showmanship. And I still reiterate that you could have win 100 people to Christ every day of your life and disappoint the Lord Jesus. Like the diplomat, one of the ambassadors of the famous Napoleon used to go around the world, and everywhere he went he brought a treasure to his wife. And one day he brought a supremely beautiful vase from the Orient, and he said, darling, look at that. She said, I don't want that gift. I want you. You're always away. Love me. She put her arms around him. He said, like so many Frenchmen, they said, no, I have someone else I love. He said, keep your gift. Oh yes, it may involve sacrifice. It may involve leaving home, but wait a minute. And it may involve service to people who are stinking and naturally you wouldn't really want to go to them. But wait a minute. When did you last get Jesus by the feet and worship him and adore him and pour out your gratitude and your love until the angels wondered what on earth was going on? Oh, the critic stood there and he said, well, of course, she's just an emotional woman. Do you know how much that's worth? We put price tags on everything, don't we? Do you know how much that ointment is worth? You see what the stupid woman has done? She's wasted it. One of them's wasted it. I think you're getting a smell of it even this morning. How could she have wasted it? It says the fragrance filled the room. No. The fragrance not only filled the room, the fragrance has filled the world ever since. She took a box of ointment, very precious, and she broke it and put it on his feet. If she put it on herself, it would have lasted maybe an hour or two. But it lasted. I always get a lift preaching this message. I preached it a few times. Man said to me once, I've heard one of your sermons 4 times. I said, you'd be amazed how many times I've heard them. And some of them don't give me a lift, but this always, I get back more than I give out if I give anything out. You see, first of all, we want to give, but no, there was a purification in one sense. You see, nobody washed the dust of the world off his feet. They didn't wear hose, and they got grit between their toes, and the slave had to wash their feet. That's why there was a slave at the door who washed everybody's feet. But she washed his feet with tears. She wiped them with the hair of her head. She could have anointed. She used tears instead of water. She used a hair of her head instead of a towel. She could have done it the cheap way. She could have put oil on his head. That was cheap. But she took ointment. That was the best thing. That was the most costly thing. But wait a minute. If she'd had it on her body when she was dead, it wouldn't have mattered too much. Or even when she was alive. But you see, to me, the punchline of the story is this. That when she had washed his feet and wiped his feet and then poured the ointment on his feet, what did she do? She wiped his feet again with the hair of her head. Well, do you get the point? You don't. Well, what she poured out on him came back on her. It was a blessing to him. But wherever she went, that fragrance was there, and he'd go past her. Oh, that's the most, like you say, oh, that's Chanel, or that's something else. You say, that's the most amazing, the most aromatic, pungent, powerful, beautiful, costly ointment in the world. I wonder where that woman got that ointment. She poured it out on him. It came back on her. That's why there's a twofold attitude in prayer. One is pouring out, even if you use prayer to that degree. And then there's a waiting until the dew drops. The dew falls. And I remind you again, dew never falls on a windy morning. God said he would be as the dew unto Israel, and the dew only drops when there is stillness. The old Quaker poet, John Greenleaf Whittier, wrote that lovely hymn, Dear Lord and Master of mankind, forgive our foolish ways. We ought to sing it every church day. They ought to sing that in the government. Forgive our foolish ways. But the last stanza says, Drop thy still dews of quietness till all our strivings cease. Take from our souls the strain and stress, and let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace. Breathe through the heats of our desire thy fullness and thy balm. Let sense be dumb, let flesh retire. Speak through the earthquake, the wind, or the fire, or the still small voice of calm. Oh, this old hymn, an old English hymn, Frida Hambry Allen wrote this. It's beautiful. Within the veil. You know, when you go into the secret place, the Holy of Holies, when you put a notice on the door not to be disturbed for 2 hours, and maybe you'll start off with prayer, and maybe you'll enter into praise, but you should finish up with adoration and worship. And Frida Hambry Allen says, Within the veil be this beloved thy portion, within the secret of thy Lord to dwell, beholding him until thy face is glory, thy life his love, thy lips his praise shall tell. Within the veil, for only as thou gazest upon the matchless beauty of his face, canst thou become a living revelation of his great heart of love, his untold grace. Within the veil, his fragrance poured upon thee, like the woman poured the ointment. Without the veil, that fragrance shed abroad. Within the veil, his hand shall tune the music which sounds on earth, the praises of thy God. Within the veil, thy spirit deeply anchored, thou walkest calm above a world of strife. Within the veil, thy soul with him united shall live on earth the resurrection life. She poured out the ointment. This man must have felt pretty bad, don't you think, watching all this go on? There's a table loaded with food. I don't know that he ever took a bite of food. There's no record of it in any of the stories. Maybe he wasted a fortune on it. Jesus wasn't wanting food, he wanted worship. God wants you to work yourself to death. No. What does it say? Kill yourself? Testify? It says worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. Do the other, but don't do it unless your soul is bathed in Him, unless you're anchored deeply in Him, unless the fragrance of God is on you. No, I don't know that Jesus took a spot of anything to eat or drank anything. I think maybe this man was saying, you know what, I just about missed it and wasted everything. I just wish Jesus could see it my way. You know, I tried for about 20 years to get God to see things my way, and He wouldn't. So I had to give up and see things His way. Jesus didn't want food. How do you know? Well, I'll tell you what, the devil, there's a lot of things you could say about him, but he's a grade A student, you know. He knows the answers. He'll never ask you to do what you can't do. He'll never ask you to walk on water. He said to Jesus, get some of those rocks and turn them into bread. He knew he could do it. Look, if you want to know how valuable worship really is, the devil was prepared to give God the whole world if he'd worship Him for 5 minutes. Does that make you realize how valuable worship is? You just fall down once and say, and worship me. The very fact he knelt would mean, I'm in subjection, your Lord, your Master. And if you just fall down and worship me for 5 minutes, I give you all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil, Jesus didn't say, they're not yours to give anyhow. They were His in one sense to give. He ruled governments to a certain degree, and wicked systems. And yet Satan so wanted worship that he said, I'll give you the world. No, you can't. Jesus isn't going to turn stones into bread. You say, now that's one miracle He didn't do. Well, I think He did it. Where's the record? Well, one morning He called some disciples over the sea and He said, boys, come and eat. We used to sing a hymn in the old days, come and dine, the Master called us, come and dine. There they met their heart's desire, bread and fish upon the fire. Do you think Jesus went shopping for fish? Do you think He knocked the baker up? It wasn't daylight. Do you think He knocked the baker up at 1 o'clock and said, hey, could you make a few hot buns right away because I want to give my disciple boys a treat. Poor boys, they're tired fishing all night. I think Jesus, this isn't in any book. It'll come up. Winky's going to put it down. But anyhow, I think that he put some stones on the floor and He just said, become bread, and they did. And He said to the devil, there, I'll do it when I want, not when you want. That's the way to get victory. You can do the right thing at the wrong time, but you never do the wrong thing at the right time. I think He made bread there just to snub the devil and laugh at the devil. But again, there's no evidence that Jesus ever took anything. All the dignitaries are there. I don't know, the disciples and others were there. And yet a little unnamed woman is the only one listed. She's listed in millions and millions of copies of the Word of God. Do you know what happened the week after? Crowds of people were sobbing and sighing and they were pointing. I think there was just one woman who was really happy at the crucifixion. It wasn't the mother of Jesus necessarily. I think it was this Mary. She looked at those feet, they had a nail through them and blood running off them, and she said, to think last week I had those feet in my hands. I'm glad I did it. While the critics said, what's she wasting money? Jesus said, she's done it against my burial. The rough thing about this to me is this, that if you take the 26th chapter of Matthew and you read the story again, it puts another slant on it that to me is terrible. Because it says that he went into the house of Simon the leper. Does that do anything for you? You say he couldn't go into the house of Simon the leper. A man wasn't allowed to. That's right. There came a day when Simon went to his wife and said, "Darling, I've kept this away from you so long I can't look at my..." "Oh," she said, "you've got leprosy. Don't use the towels. Don't touch the children." And he went to the temple and they pronounced him unclean. And he went to the gate of the city and they pronounced him unclean. And he lost citizenship and he lost fellowship and he lost every relationship. And he went up the road begging and crying, "I'm unclean," and they'd throw him a coin, he was unclean. Well, what is he doing at home? Well, there's only one reason I know that he's at home, is that one day he met Jesus and Jesus cleansed him because nobody else could heal leprosy. He runs back to the gate of the city and they say, "We know you, Simon, you're a successful businessman, you're a leper." And he says, "Well, look, oh, you've got flesh like a baby, what beautiful hands." And he ran to the temple and the priest said, "Don't come and defile God's house." And he said, "I can't defile it, look at my hands." And they said, "Oh, what beautiful hands." And he ran home and there was Rebecca and she looked through the lattice and said, don't come near, I know you want to see the children, don't come near. You're a leper." And he said, "Darling, I'm no leper." "Oh, what beautiful hands." How did he get cleansed? I don't know any other way. There was no other way known to man that a man could be healed of leprosy except that Jesus healed him. That's incredible. If Jesus hadn't have healed him, he'd still be up there with bugs on him. His flesh would be dropping off. I've been in a leper colony and preached to lepers. I've seen men without ears, without cheeks. A man you could see down his throat because all the flesh was eaten off, you could see his workings. And in that tropical atmosphere it stunk like a manure heap. It's one of the greatest meetings I was ever did. People without fingers and pus running off them because they had no medication were clapping their hands and singing, "My Jesus, I love thee, I know thou art mine." And I enjoy that better than any fancy choir all dressed up and cheap diamonds on doing the stuff on TV. A man who was a leper was cured and he forgot to worship Jesus? My God, I say reverently, how careless and forgetful, what ingratitude we could have. He was a leper. Well, in case you've forgotten, you're a leper too. Because in the Old Testament, leprosy is a type of sin. There's no cure for it. And one day Jesus went. Somebody said to me, "Don't shake hands with the leper," but I felt, all right, I'll take the risk. And I shook hands with that leper, all his stubby fingers. And I said, "I love you," and the tears rolled down what cheeks he had. And the women there, beautiful women, with half a cheek or ears off or noses off and other things. And you saw leprosy working. Say, if Jesus hadn't stopped you somewhere on the road a year or two this morning, fellow, where might you have been right now? In hell? Or serving a life sentence? Woman, you might have had 3 or 4... We had girls in Teen Challenge who looked as though they'd left school with as many as 3 legitimate kids, and they couldn't tell you how many men they'd slept with. Whether they were black or yellow or red or black or white or what, they wouldn't know. They'd just lived that lousy life. But I tell you, one morning when we went into the chapel and they said, "Brother Ravenhill is going to talk this morning," and a little Puerto Rican stood up and said, "Let's sing the national anthem." I guess I told you this before, and I thought, national anthem, get out of here. But I didn't notice what he said. He said, "Let's sing our national anthem, not the national anthem." And they stood up and they began to sing. Do you know what they sang? There were about 30 or 40 young women on this side, beautiful girls, all clean now, prostitutes, yes. Not weekend prostitutes, they were second wives to some of your most famous film stars and ball players. And they were redeemed. And here were boys who murdered and raped and done every devilish thing. And so the little Puerto Rican, his teeth were flashing there. And he said, let's sing our song. And he struck it up. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Wow, I was in tears before we got through the first stanza, and so were they. They knew the pit from which they'd been lifted. Isn't it amazing that sometimes, come on, let's be honest, you're so busy working for Him, you never touch Him during the day. We're trying to say, Lord, I served you. No, I'm going to bed dog tired. I can't even read my Bible. I'm too tired to pray. Well, that's not the way to go about it. Read Jeremiah and see how often that man of God rose early in the morning. Give him the dew of the morning when your mind is fresh and your body is fresh. He forgot to kiss Jesus. He forgot to wash his feet. He forgot to anoint his head. And I don't read he's got another chance. Briefly, that's not my best word, but let me say briefly. Somebody said, you say, finally, and you go on for another 20 minutes. I say, well, I learned that from the Apostle Paul. In his epistle, he says, finally, he writes 3 more chapters. You expect me to be better than Paul? There's one story a little more mysterious to me than this story. It's the story of the most favoured woman on earth. There's a new controversy on now. It's in this present edition of Christianity Today, because the Pope, the new Pope, this nice boy, said recently that he wants to restore veneration to the Virgin Mary, and now there's a discussion about it. We ought to honour her. Well, I honour her. I call her the Blessed Virgin because the Scripture does, but if you tell me she's co-redemptrix, I'll ask you why she wasn't crucified with Jesus. She's not co-redemptrix with Jesus. You can't pray through the Virgin Mary. It's a lie. It's the biggest fraud the devil ever put on the earth is the Roman Church. Well, nobody said amen, but it's still true, so let's go on. This woman, privileged of all the women in the world to bear the Son of God. Isn't that something? The heaven of heavens cannot contain God, and he was pressed into the matrix of the Virgin Mary. God contracted to a span, incomprehensibly made man. And there was a big convention on, and people like conventions, so Joseph and Mary decided they would go, and they went. And they had a great time. Met all the in-laws and outlaws, and enjoyed the great preaching, enjoyed everything else. And then, of course, they had to go home. Oh, it was a majestic thing, you know, when they went up to the temple. They sang the hymns, the latter part of the book of Psalms, which is the Jewish hymn book, of course. And the women went first and the men went behind. They were doing what we sing. They were marching to Zion, the beautiful city of God. And the women sang a verse and the men responded, and the women sang and the men responded. The women went first in case the brigands came down the hills to molest them and destroy and so forth. And they went back the same, except, you see, like little streams joining up. The congregation got big, big, big when they were going, but as soon as they came out of Jerusalem, the crowd got less and less, and they began to filter off. And at night, Mary goes very tired, and her feet are aching, and finally she says, excuse me, have you seen my husband? Have you seen Joseph? Was her husband in the eyes of others? Oh yes, there he is, that tall, nice. Yeah, he's there. I like your husband very much. And she says, well, where are we going to sleep? Because there's no Holiday Inns and all those trimmings we have. No blacktop roads, just dirt, roughness, dust. Must have been something following 1 million people. You'd run your teeth over it. Your tongue over your teeth, you clean them, there'd be that much grit on your lips. Well, I don't know where we're staying, darling, but I'll tell you what, this is about the hottest day, and my feet are blistering. She says, well, mine are too. You had a bad day too. Did you get a drink at the well? No, I didn't. Boy, those people were very sanctified yesterday, very selfish today. They were elbowing at the well. You couldn't get a drink. I haven't had a drink since this morning. I haven't, and I'm tired. Well, how did Jesus get up? Oh, Mary, come on, don't fool. I'm too tired. You know he's been with you all day. With me? He's not been with me. He's been with you. He hasn't been with me. Well, I thought he was you. Do you know what it says? They, supposing he was in the company. That word supposing is used twice in the New Testament. when the woman went to the garden and she heard somebody moving, and she supposed he was the gardener. So she supposed Jesus wasn't there when he was there. They supposed Jesus was there and he wasn't there. We suppose he's in the company. So what should we do? Well, what do you think she'd do? She said, serves him right, I've told him many times not to go off here and there. Let's go to sleep, Joseph. I suggest she cried herself to sleep that night. After all, if you lost a 12-year-old boy, and there were so many burglars and thieves and wild animals, will you go to sleep? She cried herself to sleep, and they got back to Jerusalem. And again she cried herself to sleep. They searched everywhere and couldn't find him. Oh, maybe he's at the pool of Siloam. He likes to watch the fish in the pool. He wasn't there. Maybe he's still down at the bazaar. He loved to see those men selling pearls. No, he wasn't there. And finally in despair they said, well, where can he be? Isn't it amazing that they lost Jesus right after they'd been to a great convention, a great religious feast? We lose him sometime because God speaks to your heart. There's blessing on your heart. And you go outside the sanctuary as a theatre you've left or something, and you talk and talk, and you dissipate the blessing God put there. There are times I think we ought to walk home and just quietly, not even speak, maybe husband and wife, and just get still and say, Lord, sink this deep into my heart so I'll never need to learn that lesson again. And they searched and they couldn't find him. And finally they said, well, we've searched the temple. It was a vast place. And they couldn't find him. And then they said finally, there's a room there. Yes, but only the chief rabbis and the dignitaries go there. We can't go there. But love gets desperate. And maybe Joseph opened the door and he said, hey, stop. There he is. What was he doing? Was he in the pulpit? Giving a lecture on Daniel, the left foot on Daniel's image, the middle toe? This is the explanation. Was he preaching prophecy? No. He wasn't doing anything like that. What was he doing? He was doing what any healthy 12-year-old boy would do. He was asking questions. And they run up again and say, don't you care about us? Well, it sounds like the men on the sea. You remember when the boat lashed the boat? It looked as though they were... I thought the disciples loved him so much they'd have shaken him and said, Master, hurry, you're going to drown. But they said, don't you care that we perish? Wasn't that lovely? Wonder he didn't say, you stupid people, I've taught you 100 lessons and you still think of number one first. Carest thou not that we perish? Hey, what are you doing? Is this your gratitude for us? We thought you were tears, we've been heartbroken, and here you are sitting in the temple asking questions. Oh, his answer was beautiful, wasn't it? When he said, well, don't you think I should be about my Father's business? I wonder if that's the first time he testified. I wonder if that's the first moment he realized what his mission on earth really was. Do you think it was, Ed? You're not sure. Tim, what do you think? He doesn't know either, so that's very helpful, thanks. I'll give my contribution, I'm not sure either. But maybe it had dawned on him, maybe while he was still in the sanctuary, God had said to him, this is where it all begins, at 12 years of age. And from there, for another 20 years, he was locked up in silence and locked up in stillness. And every great man, it seems to me, that God has used here in the Word of God, he had to be sent to an Isle of Patmos. The greatest brain the world ever had, I think, was the Apostle Paul after Jesus himself, and he had 3 years in the wilderness. And John went to the Isle of Patmos, and Moses learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, it says there in the 7th chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. He was a scholar, he was brilliant. How do you know? Because he was learning all the wisdom of the Egyptians, that's why. And it says he was mighty in word. It doesn't say he was an orator, because he stammered, but he was mighty in word. He made laws before he got the Ten Commandments. And when he was brilliant and cultured, and armies bowed down to him, and everybody revered him, God sliced his life. After all, he lived in 340s, first 40 years. He lived in the palace as a king, as a prince. The second 40 years is in the school of silence, and the third 40. God took him up at 80 years of age. Can you find me a man that's come to spiritual greatness that hasn't lived in isolation? Just one thing, I remember going in one day, Dr. Tozer had got some books, and he never put them on shelves this way, he stood them up this way because he couldn't bother to read them. And I said to him, I was in London last week talking to Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones in Westminster Chapel, and he sent his greetings to you, and he said that your book, The Pursuit of God, will be living when most modern writing, theological writing in America has perished. And he said, Glenn, be pointed like that. His office, one thing I don't like about my office, it's too small. My other office was larger, and I feel it cramps me a bit. But anyhow, you could almost do this in Dr. Tozer's office and touch the walls. It was so small. But he looked at it and he said, Len, that book, The Pursuit of God, is the distilled wisdom that God gave me for 25 years in this office. I've never been out of it. You've never what? I've never had a vacation in 25 years. I've listened and listened and listened to God. And what God has taught me, he said, I put it down there in that book. Oh, it's easy to give God things when they're cheap. Oh, yes, I like to read a book. As a matter of fact, I play tapes going to work and have a great time. Well, that's all right, but listen, you can play tapes from here to ends of the earth. It won't satisfy the Lord. It may satisfy you. He wants you to worship Him in spirit and in truth. He wants you to put everything else out, and it will cost something. She bought a small box, and I finish with this, but I'll tell you what she did. She brought it while he was living, just before he died. And I'm glad it mentions that it was £1. Do you know why? Because after he died, you'd have seen two men going up a hill with a staff, and on it they had a great big bag swinging, and it had exactly 100 pounds of that same ointment brought by Nicodemus. Some have estimated it was worth more than $1 million. He was going up to that costly mausoleum, or whatever you want to call it, where they were going to bury Jesus, because he made his grave with the rich in his death too. And these two men were going up the hill with 100-pound weight of the same ointment that woman brought £1 of. And you know what? That £1 of ointment meant much more to Jesus than the 100 pounds. Why? Because he was living when he got it. People have been shocked, disgusted, argued with me when I said, look, if you leave $1 million to a missionary group, or Agape, leave it to Agape, okay. When you die, God won't give you 10 cents for it at the judgment seat. He won't? No. How do you know? Well, here's a rich man, let's say here he is in a lovely casket, and he's left $1 million, and we're all glad he's left $1 million to the Salvation Army, and $1 million to David Wilson, $1 million to Agape. And just before I put the lid down, I want you all to come and look at him. And I want you to keep one scripture in mind when you cut. Remember, he's left $3 million for these three distinctive groups. Now, as you come and look at him, he's embalmed, he's got a lovely $100,000 suit or something, or a jewel around his neck. Just look at him. And as you look at him, I want you to remember this scripture. The Lord loveth what? A what? He doesn't look too cheerful to me. Maybe they've changed it in the Amplified. I'd better look. I don't know whether they have or not, but the Lord loveth a cheerful giver. That man would still have his $1 million. He didn't give it. Death took it from him. He met a bandit on the road called Death who said, get out. putting out like a light. 1 pound of ointment while she was living. Jesus says, I've got more out of this than all your fancy show and all the celebrities here and everything. She has ministered unto me. I can feel her feet. I can smell the fragrance. I can see the love she laid her glory there. She's got hold of the whole thing. Because he said, didn't he, you don't worship in Jerusalem. We Christians don't have to go to Rome. We don't have to go to Mecca. The Irish quote every day we go to prayer. We used to pray there a lot. And one man used to quote every time we prayed, and we prayed on earth. There's no floor in the hut. Just dropped a shell in a field, and you knelt in the grass and knelt in the dirt. And sometimes the water would run through like that. But he used to quote the same old thing, where'er we seek thee thou art found, and every place is hallowed ground. The disappointed Christ. Thou gavest me no water. Thou gavest me no oil. Thou gavest me no cake. We need to ask him, I need to ask him, and you need to ask him, how we may learn to worship him in spirit and in truth.